The lantern swung in Arthur Warren's fist as he crossed the dark yard toward the barn, its flame guttering in the hot, sulfur-laced wind that rolled down from the volcanic ridge every night in Caldermore. He had heard something shift in there, a weight settling against the old hay boards, and after 3 years running a post house on the edge of a steaming valley town, he knew the difference between a restless goat and something human-sized finding a corner to sleep in. He was not afraid. Arthur Warren had stood in a dueling circle with a blade in his hand, while crowds screamed for blood. And the thing about having done that enough times was that ordinary fear stopped landing. He pushed open the barn door with his shoulder, raised the lantern, and stopped. She was curled in the deep straw on the far side of his 2 draft horses, her back against the warm planking, knees drawn loosely to her chest. An orc woman, and a striking one, tall even in sleep, green-skinned with the warm bronze undertones the valley light brought out, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She wore close-fitted traveler's leathers, a deep brown bodice laced tight over a rust-colored undershirt, snug riding trousers tucked into tall boots that were cracked at one heel and muddy to the ankle. A short blade was sheathed at her hip. Her lower tusks curved up past her lip, not the heavy war tusks of the Northern clan soldiers he had seen at border posts, but elegant, proportioned things, the kind that on a human woman you might call refined. Her face in the lantern light was striking in the way that a well-made blade is striking, every line purposeful, nothing wasted. She was deeply, convincingly asleep. Her chest rose and fell. Her lips were slightly parted. Arthur Warren stood there for a moment and watched her breathe. He noticed, after a second or two, that her eyelids were just slightly too still, not the flickering drift of deep sleep, but the concentrated stillness of someone holding very carefully still. He had spent enough years watching men across a circle, reading bodies for the twitch that came before a lunge, to know the difference between a person surrendered to sleep and a person performing it. She knew he was there. She had known the moment the lantern light crossed her. He could have called her out on it. He could have woken her, demanded to know who she was, why she had slipped into his barn, whether the blade at her hip was a threat to him. He could have done a dozen things. Instead, Arthur Warren turned around, walked back to his house, pulled the worn quilt from the chest at the foot of his bed, the heavy one with the rust and amber patchwork that had belonged to his mother and had traveled with him from his old life into this quieter one, folded it over his arm, walked back across the yard, pushed the barn door open again, crossed to where she lay, and draped it carefully over her without a word. Then he walked back to the house and went to bed. He did not know why he did it. Or rather, he did know, and it was embarrassingly simple. She had looked cold, and the quilt had been sitting there, and he was a man who had done enough hard things in his life to find that doing one quiet, kind thing cost him nothing at all. He did not sleep well. The hot wind off the ridge kept working at the window shutter, and he kept thinking about the cracked heel of her boot, which meant she had been walking hard, and the mud on her ankles, which was the particular gray-white of the dried mineral springs on the East Road, which meant she had come from the direction of the Craterside Road, which meant she had come from the east, from across the Stoneback Range, which meant she had crossed the mountains on foot, in late season, with a cracked boot heel. By the time the sky went pale and milky above the ridge, he had already started the fire in the kitchen and put water on. When she came to the door of the house 20 minutes later, he had eggs frying and the quilt folded on the chair nearest the hearth. She stood in the doorway and watched him at the pan with an expression he could not fully read. She had green eyes, not the flat dark green of river water, but a vivid, complicated green like malachite or deep moss, the kind of color that seemed to think. Her jaw was set. One hand rested near the hilt of her short blade, not gripping it, just resting the posture of someone who had learned a long time ago to keep inventory of where her weapons were. She was, he thought, absolutely extraordinary looking, and he thought this the way he might note that a mountain was extraordinary looking, with appreciation and without the specific expectation that the mountain would do anything with the information. "You were awake," he said, still facing the pan. A pause. Then, "I was." Her voice was lower than he had expected, with a deliberate, careful quality to it, like someone who had learned to speak to humans by listening very hard and was still listening. Figured. He slid the eggs onto a plate. "Sit down if you want." She did not sit. She stood in the doorway for another 4 or 5 seconds, which he let pass without looking at her. Then her boots crossed the floor and she pulled out the chair across from the one with the quilt on it and sat down. He put the plate in front of her. He put a second plate at the spot nearest him and sat down. "I am not going to rob you," she said. "I know. You do not know that. You had all night and you didn't." "That's close enough." He picked up his fork. "Eat before they get cold." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the fork he had placed for her and ate. She ate like someone who had not eaten properly in several days, not frantic, not sloppy, but with a focused efficiency that suggested her body was running on less than it needed and was very much aware of it. He refilled her plate without asking. She ate that too. "My name is Azra," she said after the second plate was cleared. "Azra Stonefist." She said the second name with a particular deliberateness, like she was watching to see what he would do with it. Stonefist. He knew the name. Everyone in the border territories knew the name. The way they knew certain words in the old Orc dialects that you learned not because you spoke them, but because you needed to know when you were hearing them. The Stonefist clan ran the Hrathar Pass through the eastern range, collected tolls on the trade road that connected Caldermore to the eastern cities, and had been the swing vote in every clan treaty negotiation for the past 15 years. They were not at war with anyone currently, which was a statement more impressive than it sounded, because in this part of the world staying out of a war took more active effort than falling into one. "Arthur Warren," he said, "this is my post house. I know whose house it is." A pause. "You ran the dueling circuit at Brassic. 7 years. They called you the Quiet Blade." He looked at her. She held his gaze steadily, and there was something in the line of her mouth that was not quite a challenge and not quite a smile and was intensely interesting. "People called me a lot of things," he said. "They called you that because you never talked in the circle. Most fighters talk. You did not." She turned her cup in her hands. "I watched you fight once at the brass ring tournament. You were matched against the Tarvin twins in a team bout. I remember that one. You should. You bled considerably." There it was, the not quite smile, just barely. "You won anyway. Generally what I tried to do." He stood to clear the plates. "You want to tell me what you were doing sleeping in my barn instead of at the Craterside Inn, which is a 10-minute walk from here and has actual beds?" The almost smile went away. She was quiet for a moment, and the quality of the quiet shifted into something more careful. "I needed somewhere that was not the inn," she said. "The inn is where people look." He stood at the basin with the plates and thought about that, people looking for her. She had crossed the mountains with a cracked boot heel and no pack that he could see, which meant she had either left in a hurry or lost her gear somewhere along the way, and she had chosen a hay bale in a barn over a public bed because the public bed was a place people looked. "All right," he said. "You can stay in the barn. There's a proper cot in the tack room." He did not look at her when he said it because he had found over the years that some offers landed better without eye contact, without the pressure of someone watching you decide. No obligation. She was quiet behind him for a long moment. "I will pay," she said, "when I can. No need. Warren." Her voice had a specific edge on his name, not hard but grounded, like stone touched with warmth. "I will pay." He turned and looked at her then, because there was something in how she said it that required meeting. She was sitting straight in the chair, chin level, and what he saw in her face was not gratitude exactly, but something older and more specific, the pride of someone who had been on the sharp end of charity before and was very clear about the difference between accepting help and accepting humiliation. "All right," he said. "When you can." She held his gaze for a second longer. Then she nodded exactly once, and the matter was settled. Arthur Warren had been in Caldermore for 3 years, and in those 3 years he had built a life that was not exciting, but that was his. The post house sat on the eastern edge of town, where the Craterside Road came down from the mountain pass and opened up into the valley proper. He kept horses and a cart for hire, ran messages between the valley settlements, took in travelers who needed a meal or a stall for their animals, and slowly, methodically, tried to become the kind of man who woke up in the morning without already bracing for something to go wrong. The dueling circuit at Brassic had been 7 years of his life that he did not entirely regret and did not remotely miss. He had been good at it, very good, but being very good at something that chewed through people had a particular cost, and at 31 he had paid enough. He had bought the post house from a retiring courier named Penwick who had been glad to be done with it, and he had come to Caldermore in the spring, and he had learned to love the valley's sulfur smell and the way the hot springs glowed copper in the late afternoon, and he had been content. Azra Stonefist in his barn made him aware, for the first time in a while, that content was not the same as happy. She settled into the tack-room cot without ceremony. She did not sleep excessively, though he could tell she needed to. By mid-morning the first day she was up, helping him muck the stalls without being asked, working with the quiet competence of someone who had grown up around horses. She did not chatter. When he asked direct questions she answered directly. When he did not, she was silent, and the silences between them were comfortable in a way that Arthur Warren found slightly alarming, because comfortable silences with strangers were not something he was used to. She stayed 2 days. Then she stayed a third. On the third evening, Arthur Warren came in from the yard to find her sitting at his kitchen table with his carved wood map of the valley spread out in front of her, a candle burning close to it, and her expression had shifted from careful to the sort of focused, inward look that suggested she was thinking something she did not much want to think. He sat down across from her without comment and poured them both a cup from the evening's pot. "The warlord Hrathar is dead," she said, without looking up from the map. He kept his face neutral. Hrathar had been the clan chief of the Stonefist clan. A heavy, brutal man by all the reports Arthur had heard, and a name that had meant something in the balance of power across the eastern range. When he asked, 8 days ago, ambush on the pass road, now she did look up and her green eyes were direct and flat and exhausted. "My uncle," he said nothing for a moment. He let that sit there because it needed to sit. "I am sorry," he said. He was not a gentle man. She looked back at the map. "But he was mine." A pause. "There is going to be a war." The ambush was not bandits. It was staged by the Greyville Compact, the 3 merchant houses that have been trying to buy the pass road rights for 2 years. Hrathar refused to sell. Now he is dead, and the clan is in disarray, and the compact has already moved men to the eastern foothills. She set her fingertip on the map, on the mark for Caldermore. The only thing standing between the compact consolidating control of the eastern trade road is the clan treaty that Hrathar signed with the Caldermore Valley Alliance. If someone with standing presents that treaty to the Alliance Council and formally activates it, the Alliance is obligated to send armed support to the pass. The compact cannot fight both the clan and the Alliance. "And you have that treaty," Arthur said. She reached into the inner breast of her leather bodice and pulled out a folded document on heavy vellum, sealed with wax and wrapped in oiled cloth. She set it on the table between them. "I have that treaty," she said. "I am also, with Hrathar dead and no named successor, the current acting head of the Stonefist clan by bloodright, which means my arrival in Caldermore and presentation of this treaty would be the single event that prevents a war." She paused. "It would also make me the most interesting target the compact has in the valley." Arthur looked at the treaty on the table, then he looked at her. "That is why people are looking for you," he said. "That is why people are looking for me." "How many?" "At least 2 compact agents that I know of, possibly more. They followed me to the Stoneback Range. I lost them in the passes, I think, but I am not certain." She picked up her cup. "The Valley Council meets in 4 days. If I am not standing in that hall with this document in my hands in 4 days, the opportunity expires. The compact will have had enough time to move their own representatives into position, and the treaty will be challenged on grounds of procedural timing." Arthur was quiet for a moment. The hot spring wind came through the window and moved the candle flame. "So you walked into my barn," he said, because you needed 4 days to wait out a pursuit without being found, and you picked the post house on the edge of town because it was out of the way, and the man running it used to fight for a living and might not panic. She looked at him across the candle. I picked the post house on the edge of town because I have been walking for 8 days and my boot heel is broken and there was light in the window and hay in the barn. A pause. The rest was fortunate. Something in his chest did something unhelpful and warm. "All right," he said. "You are staying here for 4 days. After which I will drive you to the council hall in my cart with the treaty in your hands." He picked up his cup. "And you will not pay me when you can. You will tell me what exactly is in that treaty so I understand what I am helping you carry." She looked at him for a long, measuring moment. There was something in the way she did it, not suspicious, but thorough, the way you look at something you are considering trusting your weight to. The treaty guarantees armed mutual support between the clan and the alliance if either party's trade corridor is threatened by an external armed group, she said. It has a specific clause that names the Grayville Compact by predecessor identity. Hrathar was not a careless man when it came to his legacies. The ghost of something crossed her face. He knew someone would come for him eventually, he just did not tell me soon enough. "He told you enough," Arthur said. "You're here." She held his gaze, and for the first time something in her composure shifted, not broken, not soft, but unlocked just slightly, the way a door opens a crack in a wall you thought was solid. "Yes," she said quietly. "I am here." The next 4 days were the most electrically charged, deeply strange days Arthur Warren had spent since he retired from the circuit. Having Azra Stonefist in his post house was not like having any other guest. She occupied space differently, not loudly, but completely, with a physical presence that made rooms feel inhabited rather than merely occupied. She was up before him each morning and already at something practical. The mended wheel fitting that had been loose since summer, the torn harness strap he had been putting off, the water barrel that needed resealing against the mineral sediment. She worked with her sleeves pushed up and her dark hair tied back, and she did not ask permission for any of it, just moved through his property with the same matter-of-fact competence she brought to everything. And Arthur found himself watching her from whatever task he was doing with a specific kind of attention he recognized, and could not quite make himself stop. On the second day, one of the compact agents found the post house. Arthur saw him first, a thin man in road brown, leaning against the market corner post across the lane, watching the post house with the studied casualness of someone who was not casual at all. He did not go in. He just watched. Arthur went inside and told Azra. She listened without expression, then went to the window and looked through the shutter crack for a moment. "He is a finder," she said, "not a killer. He is marking the location. For someone else. For someone else." She let the shutter fall. "We need to move me tonight." "No," Arthur said. "We need to move him tonight." She turned and looked at him. "I used to run the pit circuit," Arthur said. "I know most of the Caldermore fight stable masters, and I know the innkeeper at the Sulphur Bell, who owes me a very large favor that I have not called in yet. The finder will be looking for an orc woman at a post house. He will not be looking for an orc woman who was never at the post house to begin with." He thought for a moment. "Myra Tenwick at the Sulphur Bell runs a legitimate operation, a courier and message service, with a back room that is technically not public. If I tell her you are a courier contact of mine with sensitive documents, she will be glad of the business and will not ask questions." Azra regarded him. "You are a more resourceful man than I initially assessed," she said. "That happens a lot," he said. She moved to the Sulphur Bell that night under a long cloak in the dark, and the finder watched the post house for 2 more days and eventually drifted away. Arthur ran messages to her daily through Myra's system, and on the morning of the 4th day, he brought the cart around to the Bell's back delivery lane at dawn, and Azra was waiting with the treaty case and a pair of new boots that Myra had helped her source. She climbed up onto the bench beside him, and the morning air was full of sulfur steam rising off the springs on either side of the valley road, ghostly white in the early light, And Arthur Warren thought this was one of the stranger mornings of his life, and could not find it in himself to wish it otherwise. They drove the valley road toward the civic quarter where the Alliance Council held its sessions, and they were half a mile out from the hall when everything went wrong. The Grayville Compact had not, it turned out, sent only one finder. They came out of the cross lane between the hot spring bathhouses in a group of 4 not soldiers, exactly, but hired men with the hardened look of serious hired men. And with them came a crowd that had not been hired but had simply materialized the way crowds did when something charged happened in a public space, drawn by the noise and the motion, filling in around the cart and its horses as the men blocked the road. And behind them, climbing up onto the base of the old trading post stone column that stood at the center of the Craterside Junction, the main public square of Caldermore, where 4 roads met around a carved orc face fountain that predated the human settlement by 100 years, came a man in a gray coat with good shoulders who had the voice and bearing of someone accustomed to public stages. Arthur recognized the type immediately, not a fighter but a speaker, the most dangerous kind in a crowd situation. "That woman," the gray-coated man called out, pointing directly at Azra on the cart bench, "is carrying stolen property belonging to the estate of the late clan chief Hrathar. She is wanted by the legitimate successors of the Stonefist clan, whose interests we represent, for the recovery of a clan document that she took without authorization." The crowd did what crowds did. It rippled, it turned, it looked, and it began slowly to contract. Arthur felt the shift happen, the way a room shifts when the attention in it turns hostile, amplified here by the open air and the size of the gathering, 50 people, then 70, drawn in from the market stalls and the bathhouse doors and the early morning lanes. Azra was very still beside him on the cart bench. "Your call," Arthur said quietly, not moving. "Tell me what you need." She said in a voice too low for the crowd, "I need to reach the hall. It is 300 yards. Arthur looked at the 4 blocked men in front of them. He looked at the crowd pressing in from the sides. He looked at the speaker on the column who was still talking, still weaving the crowd's mood. He had stood in circles with worse odds for an audience who had paid to watch him die. He handed her the reins. Then he stepped off the cart bench and down into the road, and he turned to face the gray-coated speaker on the column, and he raised his voice to carry. "My name is Arthur Warren." He let that settle. It settled. Even the gray-coated man paused, because even 4 years retired, the Quiet Blade was a name that people in the border territories recognized. "This woman is Azra Stonefist, acting clan head of the Stonefist clan by bloodright, which makes her the only authorized representative of the clan, with standing to present any clan document to this council." He looked out at the crowd with the absolute flat steadiness he had used in the circle, not aggression, just presence, the kind of presence that said, "I have stood in worse places than this, and I am standing here right now. Anyone who tries to stop her from reaching that hall is obstructing an active treaty process under the Valley Alliance Charter, which is a criminal offense in this jurisdiction. That includes hired men and it includes crowds." He paused. "Move." Nobody moved. Arthur had expected that. He did not particularly need them to move. He needed them to be unsure for 30 seconds, which was enough time for Azra to get the horses walking. He heard the cart behind him creak forward. The hired men started forward at the same moment, and Arthur Warren did something he had not done in 4 years. He put his hand on the grip of the short fighting blade he still wore at his belt out of old habit, and he squared his feet in the exact stance that the Brassic circuit had built into his bones over 7 years, and the 2 men nearest him stopped. Crowds read bodies. Even crowds that have never seen a fight know the stance of a man who has been in many. The cart rolled forward past him, and the crowd parted for the horses the way crowds always do, instinctively, for large animals moving with purpose. The gray-coated speaker shouted something, and one of the remaining men tried to get around Arthur, and Arthur stepped into his path with the unhurried precision of someone who has done this 10,000 times in practice and 300 times in earnest, and the man stopped again. The cart was 100 yards up the hall road. The hired men looked at each other. Arthur felt something sharp clip his shoulder, not a blade, a thrown piece of market cobble from somewhere in the crowd, and the impact stung and would bruise but did not move him. He stood there. The crowd watched him stand there, and several people in the front of it shifted, not forward but sideways out of the way, because there is a type of man whose stillness is more frightening than other men's movement, and the crowd was making the calculation. The cart reached the Alliance Hall steps. Arthur Warren turned and walked after it, and nobody came. He reached the hall steps to find Azra already down from the cart, and standing at the base of the stone staircase with the oiled treaty case in her hands, and she was watching him cross the square toward her with an expression he had not seen on her face before. It was not surprise, exactly. It was the look of someone seeing a thing confirmed that they had hoped but not allowed themselves to assume. His shoulder was bleeding slightly through his shirt. He pressed his hand to it. "Are you hurt?" she asked when he reached her, and the directness of it, the immediacy before thank you, before anything else, hit him somewhere specific and deep. "Scraped. I'm all right." He looked up at the hall doors. "You have an appointment." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she reached up and laid her hand briefly on his jaw, just laid it there, warm and firm, the weight of it deliberate, unhurried, and she looked at him with those malachite green eyes with something in them that was entirely clear and entirely unguarded. "Come in with me," she said. "I want you inside." He went in with her. The Alliance Council session took 4 hours, and they were not easy hours. The Grayville Compact had indeed placed representatives in the hall, 3 of them, with lawyers. And the gray-coated speaker arrived 20 minutes in, still bristling, with the hired men nowhere in evidence, and the legal team doing the heavy lifting now. They challenged the treaty timing, challenged Azra's claim to acting clan head status, challenged the circumstances of Hrathar's death, and challenged the oiled cloth around the document on procedural preservation grounds, which was possibly the most obscure attack Arthur had ever witnessed. Azra Stonefist took every challenge standing, in a clear voice, with the prepared, organized fluency of someone who had known exactly what she was walking into and had spent 8 days of mountain crossing preparing for it. She produced the blood-right documentation from an inner pocket of the treaty case. She had the original clan seal's authentication marks. She had Hrathar's dated signature. She had, from memory, citations from the Valley Alliance Charter going back 30 years that the Council's own archivist scrambled to verify and found to be accurate. She was magnificent. Arthur sat in the observer's gallery and watched her dismantle every argument they put in front of her, and he thought, "She crossed an entire mountain range on foot in broken boots carrying this, and she slept one night in my barn while she decided whether to trust me, and she let me drive the cart while she held the reins, and she is going to win this. She won it." The council voted 5-2 to activate the treaty. With the dissenting votes, Arthur checked the record afterward, both being members with documented compact affiliations. The treaty was registered, sealed, and entered into the Alliance record. Azra Stonefist was formally acknowledged as acting head of the Stonefist clan. The Alliance's military obligation was activated, which meant a 500-strong force would be moving toward the Eastern Pass within the week, which meant the Compact's hired men in the foothills would fold before they ever got to fighting. Which meant, Arthur thought as the session adjourned and the council chamber emptied in the buzzing, complicated way of rooms where something significant has just happened, that she had done it. She had walked over a mountain with a cracked boot heel and done the entire thing. He found her in the corridor outside the chamber, standing slightly apart from the remaining council members and legal parties, and her face in the corridor light was still composed, still set, but around the edges of it, the slight tension in the hinge of her jaw, the way she was holding her breath just barely too long, He could see what 4 days and 8 nights in a mountain range and 4 hours of being challenged in a public chamber cost. "It's done," he said. "It is done." She exhaled, and the tension went out of her like a tide running out, and she leaned back against the corridor wall and closed her eyes for a moment. It was the most unguarded he had seen her. He stood beside her and did not try to fill the silence. After a moment she opened her eyes. She looked at him sideways. "You stepped off that cart and stood in the middle of a crowd of people for me." "I stood in the middle of a road," he said. "I have done worse." Warren, the same weight on his name as that first morning. "You bled for me. It is a scrape. Stop diminishing it." She said it with a level precision that was not quite sharpness but was entirely clear, and then, more quietly, "You did not have to do any of this. You let me sleep in your barn. You fed me twice. You hid me with your contact. You stood in that square." A pause. "I want to know why." The honest answer was complicated, and he had been trying not to look at it directly for 4 days. But she was asking in the corridor of the Alliance Hall after winning a war that might have happened, and it seemed like the wrong time to be anything but direct. "Because I wanted to," he said. "Because you came to my door, well, my barn, and you needed something and you were too proud to ask for it, and I recognized that, and I thought the least I could do was make it easy." He met her eyes. "And because somewhere between the second plate of eggs and the part where you cited 30-year-old charter law from memory in a council chamber, I became very invested in how it turned out." She held his gaze. The green of her eyes in the corridor light was deep and steady. "I was awake," she said, "when you put the blanket over me. I know. I let you. I did not move or speak because—" She paused, and he could see her choosing the words with the same deliberateness she brought to everything. "Because it felt like something I did not want to interrupt." The corridor was empty around them. "I was not entirely sure what I was going to find when you pushed that door open," she continued. "I had been running for 8 days and I was exhausted, and I had thought, I will get up and show the blade and bluff my way through it if he raises a fuss. And then you walked in and you looked at me for a moment, and I thought you were assessing the situation, the way a fighting man does, and I thought, yes, all right, here is the fuss, I will deal with it." The ghost of a smile more defined than before. "And then you left. And then you came back with a blanket." A pause. "And I thought, this is not what men do." "What do men do? They demand, they bargain, they call the constable. They stand in the door with a torch and tell you to get out." She studied him. "They do not come back with a blanket." "I am retired," Arthur said. "I have very little left to prove." She laughed. It was not a polished sound, it was real, short and warm, surprised out of her like something she had not been planning to give, and it changed her whole face, and Arthur Warren thought, "Oh no. Oh, that is extremely bad for me. I am completely done." Something of what he was thinking must have been visible, because she looked at him with those green eyes, and the laugh warmth fading slowly into something more measured, more deliberate, and she tilted her head just slightly in the manner he had started to recognize as her thinking at him rather than about him. "Arthur Warren," she said, "what happens now?" He had been thinking about that. In the 4 days at the post house and the nerve-lit morning of the square and the 4 hours of the council session, and now here in the corridor with his shoulder aching and her looking at him with that direct green gaze, he had been thinking about what happens now, and the honest answer was that he did not know, but that for the first time in a long time he was very interested to find out. "You have a clan to go back to," he said. "A pass road to hold, an eastern range to stabilize." "Yes. And I have a post house," he said, "and some horses, and a very good quilt that I did not get back yet." The corner of her mouth moved. "The quilt is in the tack room," she said. "I folded it." A pause. "I am going to have to go back east, not immediately. There are formalities here with the council and the alliance forces to coordinate, possibly a week, perhaps 2. She was still looking at him. "Will you let me pay you for a room in the meantime?" "The tack room is yours," he said. "No charge, Warren. The eggs are also free." She stepped away from the wall, and she did something then that he had not expected, and that moved through him like warm water. She reached out and took his hand, not a grip, not a formal hold, just his hand in hers briefly, a thing done because she wanted to and not for any other reason, and she looked at him with something that was entirely open and entirely steady. "I will pay you," she said, "in some other currency." He turned his hand in hers and held it properly and said nothing, because some moments did not improve with words. They walked out of the Alliance Hall and into the afternoon, where the sulfur steam was rising off the valley springs in lazy white columns against the orange-lit volcanic ridgeline, and the day smelled like mineral heat and something clean after rain, and the cart was standing at the hall steps exactly where they had left it. She climbed up first. He followed. She held the reins. He let her. The 2 weeks that followed were not what Arthur Warren would have predicted, which was that they would be busy and complicated and deeply, unexpectedly good. The council formalities required Azra's presence daily, and she moved through those sessions with the same systematic competence she brought to everything. But in the evening she came back to the post house, and something loosened in her, some public-facing tension that the council days required, and she was different in the kitchen and the yard, warmer, and occasionally funny in a dry, perfectly timed way that caught him off guard every time. On the third evening she came back to find him at the table with the accounts books and a cup of tea gone cold and a headache she could apparently read on his face, and she sat down across from him and said, without any preamble, "I used to keep my uncle's toll records. Show me what the problem is." He showed her. She solved it in 20 minutes. He looked at the solution for a long moment. "That is a very good system," he said. "It is obvious once you stop trying to reconcile the columns by date and reconcile them by root instead." She closed the book. "You are running this business the way a fighter runs a bout. You are watching for the threat instead of the pattern. The pattern is more useful. Is that criticism? It is observation, a pause. I do it affectionately." He looked at her across the table. She looked back, straight and easy, and there was something in the air between them that had been building since the morning with the blanket and the eggs and had been slowly sharpening in each subsequent day and evening, a specific charge that was no longer ignorable and that he suspected neither of them particularly wanted to ignore. "Azra," he said. "Arthur," she said, matching his tone exactly. "We are doing something here," he said. "I want to name it." "Then name it." "I am not," he paused, looking for the honest version. "I am not a man who is going to suddenly become interesting. I run a post house in a steaming valley. I have some horses and one good quilt. I retired from a life I did not love in favor of one I do love, which is this one, and that is about the full sum of it." She watched him with those green eyes and let him talk. "You are," he spread his hand slightly. "You are the acting head of a clan with control of the most important trade pass in the Eastern Range. You just prevented a war. You cited 30-year-old charter law from memory. You have your uncle's blood right and a title and an army coming over the mountains to meet your command." He looked at the table, then back at her. "I am trying to be honest about the distance between those two things." She was quiet for a moment. Then she unfolded from her chair and crossed to his side of the table, and she stood beside him in the way that required him to turn his face up slightly to look at her, and she looked down at him with an expression that was so clear and so undefended that it stopped him entirely. "When I was on that mountain," she said, "on the fourth day, when my heel broke and the compact men were still on the road behind me, and I had not slept in 30 hours, I thought about stopping. Not turning back. Just stopping. Sitting down somewhere cold on that road and letting the document stay there and letting whatever was going to happen happen." A pause. "I did not stop, but I thought about it." She put her hand on the side of his face, her thumb against his jaw, her fingers curled back toward his ear, and the touch was so warm and so direct it made his chest ache. "And when you walked into that barn with a lantern and a borrowed quilt, and you did not demand or bargain or make the moment about anything except me being cold, I thought, there are whole mountains I would cross again for a man like that." Arthur Warren had stood in dueling circles before crowds of hundreds and not felt this. He turned his face into her hand just slightly, and she made a sound at that, low and quiet, something between recognition and satisfaction. And then she bent down and kissed him, and it was nothing like a tentative first kiss. It was deliberate and warm and thorough, the way she did everything, and it tasted like the mint tea they had shared earlier and like something specific and irreplaceable. And when it ended, she stayed close, her forehead almost against his, and she was smiling in a way he had not yet seen on her face, open wide and real, and only slightly like she was also surprised by it. "Clan Wright," she said softly, "says that when a woman marks a man as hers, she does so openly. No ambiguity, no implication." She ran her thumb along his jaw. "I am marking you as mine, Arthur Warren, openly." "I accept," he said, slightly breathless, which apparently satisfied something very specific in her, because she made a warm sound against his mouth and kissed him again, and he put his hand up to catch her face and she leaned into it. And the accounting books and the cold tea and the post house and the volcanic ridgeline and the whole steaming valley were still there, but had become very comfortably irrelevant. The next several days had a charged, warm quality that Arthur had not experienced in years. They moved through the ordinary work of the post house in the day with a new ease between them, a new physical closeness, her hand on his shoulder as she passed, his fingers finding hers as they stood at the fence watching the horses in the evening. That made the ordinary feel remarkable, like the familiar world had been relit from inside. She told him about the clan, about growing up on the pass road with her uncle, about the particular education of watching a man control a strategic resource through a combination of absolute authority and selective restraint, about the years when the compact first began its acquisition attempts, and Hrathar had spent nights with maps and lawyers preparing for exactly the confrontation that came 8 days after he died. She told him about the ambush, in a voice that was even but careful, and he let her tell it at whatever pace she needed, and he did not reach for words because there were not good words and she did not need him to have them. He told her about the circuit, about Brassic and the 7 years, and the particular discipline of fighting not in anger but in cold precision, which looked to audiences like something terrifying, but was actually the most controlled state he knew, and about the moment, a bout against a man called the River Wolf, a career-making fight that he won and that left the other man with a permanent limp, when he understood that winning was not the same as wanting it, and that wanting it was the only thing worth doing something for. "So you stopped," she said. "So I stopped. And came here." She looked around the kitchen, the low-beamed ceiling, the hearth, the window with the valley steam beyond it, "and built this. And built this." He looked at it too and thought it still looked like exactly the right life, and now it also had her in it, and the combination was something he had not known to want until it was there. On the 9th day, one of the council liaison officers came to the post house with a message that Azra received in the yard and read standing. She folded it without expression and came back inside. "The Alliance forces have reached the eastern foothills," she said. "The compact has withdrawn. The pass road is secure." She set the message on the table. "I need to go back." Arthur had known this was coming. He had known it for 9 days and had not been pretending otherwise. He looked at the message on the table and then at her. "When," he said, 3 days, there are still the final council ratifications." She sat down. "The clan needs leadership that is physically present on the pass. I cannot run the Stonefist road from Caldermore." A pause. "Come with me." The directness of it, no preamble, no hedging, the simple direct statement of it was so completely her that it caught him off guard, even having half prepared for it. "The pass road," he said. "The Hrathar Pass. The clan holds the western garrison and the toll station. It is not a city. It is not comfortable in the way this is comfortable. It is cold and high, and the work is constant and political and sometimes dangerous." Her green eyes were level on his face. "But it is mine, and I want it to be yours." A pause. "Or," and here something shifted slightly in her expression, the smallest vulnerability, "or I will come back, when I can, between the governance demands. I will come back to Caldermore." He heard both offers and understood what each of them cost. She was not asking him to follow her because she needed a second. She was asking him because she wanted him specifically, wanted to wake up in a place that held them both, wanted to carry what was hers alongside someone who understood what things were worth carrying. She was asking not from weakness but from a wanting that was entirely clear. He thought about the post house, the horses, the hot spring mornings and the sulfur smell and the 3 years of building a quiet life. He thought about lying awake listening to the window shutter and calculating the wear on a stranger's boot heel and what it said about where she had come from. He thought about what it felt like to not be alone after a long time of being alone, and about how that was not a small thing, and about what it cost to throw a thing like that back because you were attached to the known shape of your days. "I will need to find someone to run the post house," he said. Azra Stonefist's face did something extraordinary. The controlled, managed public composure cracked open into something warmer than he had the word for, and she pressed her lips together hard for a moment and her green eyes were very bright. "I know someone," she said when she had herself. "A retired courier. Her name is Myra Tenwick. She has been looking to expand her operation for a year." "Myra," he blinked. "You already thought of this." "I thought of everything." She was, in fact, not quite suppressing a smile. "I am the acting head of the Stonefist clan. I make contingency plans, including me, especially you." He looked at her across the table and something settled in him. Not the settling of giving something up, but the settling of something clicking into exactly the right place. The way a blade fits a good scabbard, the way a door closes properly on a well-hung frame. "The quilt comes with me," he said. She let the smile through then fully, and it was beautiful in the way that particular kind of warm, true smile is always beautiful, the kind that is rare and therefore precious. "Obviously," she said. The next 2 days moved with a strange mixture of forward momentum and that particular ache that comes with the end of a thing, even when what ends it is something better. Arthur spoke to Myra Tenwick, who agreed to take the post house with an enthusiasm that suggested she had perhaps been waiting for exactly this. He arranged the horses, keeping one, his own, for the mountain road, and settled the post house accounts in the reorganized, route-reconciled format Azra had shown him, which made the transition significantly cleaner. He packed what he owned, which was not much: the quilt, his blade, his clothes, a carved wooden writing case that had been in his pack since Brassic, the carved wood map of the valley, because he had developed a fondness for it. He was in the yard on the second evening with the pack beside him and the single horse saddled and the air full of spring-warm sulfur steam and last light on the ridge, when Azra came out of the post house and stood beside him looking at the valley in the fading light. She stood close enough that their shoulders touched, and she did not step away from it, and neither did he. "Are you afraid," she asked, "of the mountain road? Of this?" She gestured slightly in a way that meant all of it. He thought about it honestly for a moment. "No," he said. "I was afraid of the wrong things for a long time. I am not afraid of this." She turned to look at him, and in the last valley light her face was malachite green and bronze and extraordinary, and her green eyes held something that was entirely sure of itself. "I'm going to be difficult to live with," she said. "I give direct orders from habit and I keep very early hours and I have significant opinions about toll road management that I will share at length. I ran a dueling circuit," he said. "I have opinions about violence management. We can compare notes." She took his face in both her hands and kissed him thoroughly, in the yard, in the fading valley light, where anyone coming down the road could see them and he did not care at all. And when she pulled back, she had both her thumbs against his cheekbones and she was looking at him with something that was entirely clear and entirely decided. "Mine," she said quietly. "Yours," he said. They left Caldermore the following morning, before the council buildings opened, when the valley was still blue and steaming, and the volcanic ridge was just catching the first light in shades of amber and rose. They rode side by side on the eastern road, Azra on her recovered clan horse and Arthur on his, and the treaty case was in her saddlebag and the quilt was in his, and ahead of them the Stoneback Range rose up in its cold, white-edged enormity against the sky. At the valley's edge, where the road began to climb, Azra pulled her horse to a brief stop and looked back at Caldermore spread below them. The hot spring steam, the tile rooftops, the old Orc Face fountain at the Craterside Junction still standing in the morning square. "First time I came here," she said, "I came at night, on foot. I did not see it like this." "It's a good valley," Arthur said. She looked at it for another moment, and then she looked at him with a quiet completeness. "Yes," she said, "it is." They turned up the mountain road and began to climb. The Hrathar Pass road was everything Azra had said it was: cold and demanding and unrelentingly real. But it opened itself to Arthur the way hard places do to people who are not afraid of them, slowly, through the grain of its details. The Western Garrison was a stone-built compound at the pass's midpoint, a collection of thick-walled halls and stores and stables that the clan had been maintaining for generations, adding onto and shoring up as the years went by until it was something between a fortress and a community, with the particular lived-in warmth of both. The clan members who had remained at the garrison during the crisis received Azra with the deep specific relief of people who had been holding things together under pressure, and were very glad the crisis had resolved and even gladder that she was back. They received Arthur with the wariness that was honest given everything, and he did not push against it. He worked. He knew horses, and the garrison had 15 of them, and horses need care, and the farrier had been managing alone for 3 weeks. He learned the toll record system and identified 3 procedural inefficiencies that Azra confirmed were problems they had been putting up with for years. He was quiet in meetings unless asked directly, and he was asked directly with increasing frequency. The clan warlord, a grizzled woman named Uatha who had served Hrathar for 30 years and was now Azra's second, watched him for 2 weeks, and then one evening, at the garrison table after the late meal, said, "The man from Caldermore kept his feet in the square." She did not elaborate on what she meant by this, and nobody else did either, but something shifted in the room, and after that the wariness became something that was not yet warmth but was unambiguously respect. At night, in the clan head's quarters that Azra occupied in the garrison's main hall, the cold of the pass kept the fire necessary, and they learned to share the warmth of it and the deep particular warmth of each other, and the quilt from the post house proved itself exactly large enough for 2. Azra slept without the controlled stillness of that first night. She slept with her whole body finally surrendered to rest, and sometimes she pulled him close in the night with the possessive, uncomplicated certainty of a woman who had decided about something and had no second thoughts. And Arthur Warren thought, "This is the thing I did not know I was building toward. All the circuit years and the post-house years and the quiet early mornings. This specific warmth." In the 4th week, a compact legal team arrived at the pass toll station with a formal document challenging Azra's blood right succession on the basis of a contested clause in the clan law they claimed superseded the standard blood right protocol. It was, Arthur recognized, the last move the compact had left not military, not agents, just lawyers and paper. Azra spent 3 days in Uatha's map room with the clan law documents and her own records, and eventually emerged with a counterargument that was so precisely constructed that the compact lawyers asked for a week's recess to consult their own principles. They left the pass and did not come back. 2 days later, a message arrived from the Grayville Compact's lead principal formally withdrawing all claims and dissolving the pass acquisition endeavor. "It is done," Azra said, the same 2 words she had said in the Alliance Hall corridor, and the same quality of exhausted satisfaction in them. But this time she said them standing at the garrison's outer wall looking across the pass at the eastern range with Arthur beside her, and she leaned against him slightly as she said it, just her shoulder against his, and he put his arm around her, and she let herself be held, which he had come to understand was not something she did for everyone or lightly. "Completely done?" he asked. Completely done. A pause. We are going to have to hire another toll road clerk and repair the north wall before winter, and there is a drainage problem in the lower stable that I have been putting off. She tilted her head against him slightly. I have a list. Of course you do. You are on the list. At what position? She considered. The list is not ordered by urgency, she said. It is ordered by importance. He pressed a kiss to her temple, warm against the cold pass air, and she turned her face into it in the way she had that she probably did not know she did, seeking the warmth of it instinctively, and it was so completely her. So entirely the woman who had put herself to sleep in a stranger's barn rather than ask for help directly, and who had walked a mountain range on a broken boot to save a war, and who had named him hers with both hands on his face in a post-house yard, as if the claiming were the most natural thing in the world, that he held her a moment longer against the cold, just because he could. The winter settled into the Hrathar Pass with a serious, white-edged intent, and with it came the specific rhythm of garrison life that Arthur learned the way he had learned the circuit, through repetition, through attention, through the gradual accumulation of small certainties. He knew the horses by name and the stable schedule by heart. He knew where the drainage problem in the lower stable came from, and he fixed it with Uatha's grudging approval and 2 weeks of cold weather stonework. He knew the toll record system well enough that Azra now sent the incoming records to him first, and they reconciled them together in the evenings, her with the ledgers and him with the route maps, in a partnership so comfortable it felt like they had always done it this way. He also knew, because she told him things now, in the way people who have stopped defending themselves tell things, steadily and without performance, that the succession was not entirely secure yet. There were 2 distant clan cousins who had not formally contested Azra's blood right, but had also not formally affirmed it, which meant there was a procedural window that could still be exploited if the compact regrouped or if an internal challenger found backing. Is that a real threat? He asked. It is a real uncertainty, she said, the careful distinction he had come to recognize as her version of yes, but I am managing it. Roth and Veth Stonefist are not fighters and not really politicians. They are cautious men who will follow the direction of whichever current looks strongest. She set down her pen. The formal clan confirmation ceremony would close that window entirely. It requires a full gathering of the clan bloodlines and the formal oath-giving, and it needs to happen before the spring trading season when the pass opens and things get complicated. When would you want to hold it? Midwinter. The traditional time. She looked at the table for a moment, then at him with her direct green gaze. Clan custom says the head presents before the gathering alone, but custom also has always said that the head may present with a consort, a named partner, and the naming of a consort is itself a formal act, registered with the gathering and binding. A pause. I want to name you. Arthur set down the ledger. Azra, he said. I know what it entails, she said. I am not asking lightly. You would be named to the clan, which means the clan knows your name and can call on it, not as a warrior, not as subordinate, but as my consort, which carries its own standing and its own obligations. Her voice was steady and careful and entirely earnest. I am asking because I want to. Not because it solves the succession problem, though it does also solve the succession problem. The ghost of a smile. I am very good at finding arrangements that serve multiple purposes. I know, he said. I have seen your accounting systems. She looked at him with that open, bright expression. Is that a yes? She asked. He thought about the man who had carried a lantern across a dark yard not knowing what he would find, and the man who had crossed a road full of people because she needed 300 yards, and the man who had packed a quilt and a writing case and followed her up a mountain road because the alternative was unthinkable. He thought about all the versions of himself that had been working their slow way toward this specific moment and this specific woman. It is a yes, he said. The midwinter ceremony at the Hrathar Pass garrison was not a grand thing by the standards of the lowland cities, but it was the right kind of right, which is a different and better standard. The clan bloodlines came in from the eastern settlements, and the garrison filled with people and lantern light, and the particular loud warmth of an orc gathering. And Roth and Veth Stonefist arrived on the second day, and seeing the room, affirmed without challenge. Uatha gave a speech that was extremely short and extremely complimentary in the specific way of warriors who have accepted something after spending time refusing to. Azra stood before the gathering in the garrison's main hall with the clan seal in her hands, and Arthur stood at her side in the good coat he had bought in Caldermore before they left, and she named him in the formal clan words, and the gathering responded with the confirming phrase. And Arthur Warren, who had been the quiet blade of Brassic and a post-house keeper in a steaming valley, and a man who had gone to his barn in the dark with a lantern, and found something he had not expected to find, became consort to the head of the Stonefist clan. The gathering feast afterward was loud and warm and ran very late, and somewhere in the middle of it, Azra found him at the wall where he had retreated slightly to take in the room, and she came to stand beside him and press the whole line of her side against his, shoulder to hip, and she did not say anything for a long moment. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Perfectly all right." He looked at the room, the lantern light and the clan members and the fire and the winter cold pressed against the thick walls outside. "It is a good gathering. It is." She tilted her face up to look at him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For saying yes when I was in your barn," she said quietly. "For all of the yesies after that." He turned and looked down at her, and the lantern light was in her eyes and on the planes of her face, and she was so clearly, entirely herself. The woman who had planned for every contingency, who took what she wanted with both hands, who had walked a mountain alone and presented a war-ending treaty with a bloody boot heel and a straight spine, and who had also pressed herself against the warmth of him in the dark on cold garrison nights with the uncomplicated trust of someone who has decided to let themselves have something good. He put his arm around her, and she leaned into it. "I was always going to say yes," he said. Outside the garrison walls, the Hrathar Pass was deep in winter snow, the trade road quiet under white, the mountains enormous and cold and entirely indifferent. Come spring the road would open, and the tolls would run, and the politics would resume, and the compact would eventually regroup in some new form because that was the nature of things, and there would be more challenges and more council sessions, and more long nights with ledgers and maps. But tonight the hall was warm and the gathering was loud, and Azra Stonefist had her shoulder against Arthur Warren's and her hand in his, and the quilt from the post house was on the bed in the clan head's quarters at the end of the hall, waiting for them. And that was the full sum of it, and it was exactly enough. There had been a man who ran messages and kept horses in a steaming valley town, and went to bed each night without knowing quite why the quiet felt a little too much like emptiness. There had been a woman who crossed a mountain alone because she trusted no one and had built her life around being capable of exactly that. And then there had been a barn and a lantern and a quilt that an old fighter had gone back for when he could simply have left her to the cold, and she had lain still under it with her heart doing something quiet and specific, and neither of them had said anything about it at all, and they had both been right not to, because some moments are better held than spoken. In the morning there would be drainage reports and toll records, and a letter from the Alliance requiring formal response, and the 2 draft horses that needed their winter shoeing checked. In the morning there would be the business of a life that was real and demanding and entirely theirs. Tonight the hall was warm and they were in it together, and the Hrathar Pass held the winter quiet on all sides, and Arthur Warren had never in his life felt so completely, uselessly, irreversibly glad about anything. He was, he thought, keeping the quilt.